There is a tax being collected from you right now. Not from your paycheck. Not on your property. Not when you file in April. This one doesn't have a form. It doesn't have a line item. It doesn't show up on any bill you've ever received. It's collected every time you buy groceries. Every time you fill up your tank. Every time you pick up a prescription. Every time you replace something that broke in your house. It's collected in silence, hidden inside the price of ordinary things, and the average American household is paying $1,300 more per year because of it. You didn't vote for it. You weren't asked. Nobody held a town hall. Nobody sent a letter. One day prices started going up, and the explanation everyone reached for, inflation, corporate greed, supply chains, turned out to be incomplete. Or deliberately vague. My name is Astrid, and what I do is look at the invisible machinery behind your bank account. The systems that move money out of regular people's pockets without anyone ever saying out loud that that's what's happening. If that's the kind of clarity you want, subscribe, because what I'm about to show you is something most people are actively being kept confused about. Let me take you back to something that happened quietly over the last 12 months. You've probably heard the word tariff before. Maybe you thought of it as a political thing. Something that gets debated in Washington and doesn't really touch your daily life. Maybe you heard it in the context of trade wars and figured it was a problem for big corporations, not for someone standing in the checkout line at a supermarket. That was the story most people were told. It was wrong. Here's what a tariff actually is, stripped down to its mechanical truth. When the United States government puts a tariff on goods coming in from another country, it forces the companies importing those goods to pay a tax. A percentage of the value of whatever they're bringing in. It can be 10%. It can be 25%. In some categories announced in early 2026, it's 100%. Now here's the part that changes everything. Those companies don't pay that tax and move on. They price it into their products. They pass it through to the next person in the supply chain, who passes it to the next, who passes it to the retailer, who passes it to you. By the time that tax reaches your cart, it doesn't look like a tax anymore. It looks like the price of pasta going up. It looks like olive oil jumping. It looks like everything costing a little more for no obvious reason. That's not an accident. That is the mechanism. And the mechanism has been running at full speed for over a year now. The Yale Budget Lab, one of the most rigorous economic research institutions in the country, did something most media outlets haven't bothered to do. They calculated what tariffs are actually costing American households in real dollar terms right now. The number they came back with, $650 to $1,300 per year. Per household. Already happening. Not a projection for some future scenario where things get worse. This is the current reality, built into the prices of things you are already buying today. $1,300 a year is $108 every single month. Every month, $108 leaves your household that didn't need to leave. $108 that you didn't agree to spend. $108 that is not going toward anything you chose, not your rent, not your savings, not your kids, not a single thing that mattered to you. It's just gone. Into a system. Quietly. Now let's make that number real, because $1,300 sounds abstract until you see where it actually lives. A 32-ounce bottle of canola oil that cost $4.79 18 months ago is sitting at $7.19 today. A can of imported crushed tomatoes that was $1.49 is now $2.30. A bag of ground coffee that ran $11 is $15.80. A pound of imported shrimp that was $8.99 is $13.50. These are not luxury items. These are Tuesday night dinner ingredients. And none of these price increases showed up with an explanation. They just happened. Week after week. Item after item. Quietly rearranging the math of your household without your permission. That's your $1,300. Spread across 1,000 small purchases, invisible in any single transaction, completely undeniable when you add them up across 12 months. And then JP Morgan released an analysis in early 2026 with a finding that should have been front-page news everywhere. They found that 80% of tariff costs that businesses absorbed in 2025 are now being passed directly to consumers in 2026. 80%. What that means in plain language, the companies that were quietly eating this cost, holding prices stable to keep customers, have hit their limit. They absorbed it as long as they could. And now they're done. The full weight of that cost is shifting to you, and it's shifting now, and it is going to keep shifting throughout the rest of this year. The prices you're seeing today are not the ceiling. Here's the part of the story that I find genuinely difficult to talk about without getting angry. Because we need to be honest about who this is actually hitting. When most people hear about tariffs, the implicit assumption is that it's a shared burden. Everyone pays a little more. The sacrifice is collective, spread evenly across the economy. That is not what the data shows. The Yale Budget Lab's analysis found that lower and middle-income households pay a dramatically higher percentage of their income in tariff-related costs than high-income households. Not slightly higher. Dramatically higher. Think carefully about why. A household making $50,000 a year spends a large fraction of its income on groceries, household goods, gas, and everyday essentials, exactly the categories that tariffs hit the hardest. A household making $500,000 a year spends a tiny fraction of its income on those same categories. The dollar amount they're losing to tariffs might look similar on paper, but the percentage of their actual life that it represents is completely different. If tariffs cost you $1,300 and you make $50,000, that is 2.6% of your gross income. Gone. Before taxes. Before rent. Before anything you decided mattered. If tariffs cost $1,300 and you make $500,000, it is a rounding error. It is literally below the margin of uncertainty in their monthly budget. It doesn't register. This tax, the one nobody voted for, is structurally, mathematically designed to fall hardest on people who have the least room for it. Not because anyone sat down and designed it that way with malicious intent, but because that's what always happens when you tax the consumption of everyday goods. The people who spend the highest percentage of their income on everyday goods carry the highest percentage of the burden. Every time. Without exception. Somewhere, right now, in a room with excellent air conditioning, people who made decisions about this trade policy are having lunch. Nobody in that room has stood in a checkout line recently doing mental math about whether they can afford the name brand olive oil or whether they need to put it back. They have assistants who handle groceries. They have people for that. You don't have people for that. You have yourself and a receipt and a number that keeps climbing. And here's what nobody is talking about yet. The part that makes the $1,300 figure look almost optimistic by comparison. When your grocery bill goes up $80 a month and your paycheck doesn't move, something has to give. Maybe you put a little less into savings this month. Maybe you carry a slightly higher balance on your credit card. Maybe you skip the car maintenance you've been meaning to schedule, or the dentist appointment that isn't technically urgent yet. None of those cuts feel dramatic in the moment. Each one is a small compromise. A minor adjustment. Totally manageable. But each one carries a consequence that arrives later. The savings you don't put away today aren't there for the emergency 6 months from now. The credit card balance you let creep up is accumulating at 23% interest, so that $80 monthly grocery shortfall is generating another $18 a month in interest charges you wouldn't have had. The car maintenance you skip becomes a $2,200 repair when the problem can't be ignored anymore. The dentist you skipped becomes a $1,800 crown. The hidden tax at the grocery store doesn't cost $1,300. It costs $1,300 plus everything it triggers downstream. And almost nobody is calculating that second number. Because it's invisible. Because it's spread across months. Because each individual consequence has its own explanation that sounds completely unrelated to a trade policy decision made in Washington. This is exactly how people fall behind financially while doing everything right. They're not buying things they can't afford. They're not making reckless decisions. They're just operating inside a system that is quietly, consistently extracting more from them than they realize, and the extraction compounds in ways that are almost impossible to trace back to a single source. Now I need to tell you about something that almost every major outlet covering tariffs has glossed over. Because the grocery bill is the part people can see. There's another part coming that most people haven't processed yet. In April 2026, 100% tariffs were announced on pharmaceuticals. 100%. Think about what that number means in practice. A medication manufactured abroad, which describes the majority of generic drugs that Americans depend on daily, could effectively double in cost. Blood pressure medication, thyroid medication, diabetes management, antidepressants. The drugs that keep people's bodies functioning. The ones that people on fixed incomes have arranged their entire financial lives around. The ones that are not optional. When that announcement came out, the stock market had its worst single day since the COVID crash of 2020. The market understood immediately what most regular people hadn't processed yet. This is not an abstract policy shift. This is a direct, immediate financial threat to millions of households that have zero flexibility in that particular line item. You can decide to buy domestic pasta instead of imported. You can swap your cooking oil. You cannot decide to just stop taking your blood pressure medication because the price went up. The grocery bill was the first signal, the warning that something had fundamentally changed. The pharmaceutical tariffs are the second signal. And unlike the grocery aisle, where you have some room to maneuver, the pharmacy is where people run completely out of options. I'm telling you this now not to create panic, but because the difference between the people who come through this period financially intact and the people who don't is almost always the same thing, the ones who made adjustments early, before they were forced to, before the moment became obvious, before the emergency was already happening. So here is what you actually do with everything I just told you. Because information without direction is just expensive anxiety. The first thing, and I want you to sit with this for a moment before moving on, is that what you've been feeling is not a personal failure. If you've been looking at your bank account wondering where the money went, wondering why you feel like you're treading water no matter how hard you work, wondering why the numbers stopped adding up the way they used to, you are not bad at managing money. You are correctly sensing a real, external pressure being applied to your household by a system that most people don't understand and most media isn't explaining clearly. That matters enormously. Because you cannot make good strategic decisions from a place of self-blame. You can make excellent decisions from a place of accurate understanding. Now you have accurate understanding. Second, your 2024 budget is lying to you right now. If you're using last year's grocery numbers, last year's household goods estimates, last year's cost assumptions for anything that involves imported goods, those numbers are wrong. Probably by 15 to 25% depending on your spending patterns. A budget built on 2024 prices in 2026 guarantees that you will consistently overspend every month and never understand why. Take your actual spending from the last 3 months. Use that as your new baseline. Build from reality, not from memory. Third, get strategic about what you're buying, not just how much you're spending. Tariffs don't hit everything equally. Imported goods carry the highest exposure. Domestically produced alternatives carry much lower exposure. You don't need to become obsessive about reading country of origin labels on every single item, but making a few deliberate shifts in the categories that have spiked the hardest will have a real, measurable impact across 12 months. Domestic cooking oils. Seasonal domestic produce. These are small choices that compound into real money when you make them consistently. Fourth, and this one is the most important, and the one most people will skip because it feels impossible right now. Build your emergency fund faster than you plan to. The pharmaceutical tariff situation means the margin for error in household finances is narrowing. The number of things that can go wrong and cost you serious money in a short window has increased. The emergency fund is no longer a nice-to-have financial goal for someday. It is the difference between absorbing a financial shock and being put into debt by one. Start with whatever number doesn't feel paralyzing. $50 a month. Automatic transfer. You don't see it leave. But you start now, not when things feel more stable, because the honest truth is that things may not feel more stable for a while. And the people who waited for the right moment to start building their cushion will look back at 2026 wishing they had started before the right moment felt obvious. The $60 that went missing from your last grocery run was not random. It was not inflation. It was not the store getting greedy. It was not you miscounting or losing track or being careless with money. It was a policy decision, made by people who will never personally notice what a grocery run costs, that landed in your cart, in your receipt, in your bank account, and in the low-grade financial stress that's been sitting somewhere in the back of your mind for months now. Understanding that doesn't give you the $60 back, but it changes everything about what you do next. Because the moment you stop blaming yourself for something that was never your fault, and the moment you understand the actual mechanism well enough to work around it intelligently, you stop being a passive participant in someone else's economic experiment and start being someone making deliberate choices with accurate information. That shift from confusion to clarity is one of the most practically powerful things that can happen to your finances. Not because it changes the prices, but because it changes you. The people on the other side of this period, the ones whose financial foundation is still solid when the dust settles, won't be the ones who earned more or got lucky. They'll be the ones who understood earlier, who updated their numbers faster, who built their buffer before it became obviously necessary. That can be you. Now you know what's happening. That's where it starts. If someone in your life has been blaming themselves for falling behind financially, share this with them. Not because it fixes the prices, but because the most useful thing you can give someone right now is the accurate picture of what they're actually dealing with so they can stop fighting themselves and start navigating the actual problem. Everything coming up on this channel connects back to this. The housing math that doesn't work for most people. The car payment trap that's gotten worse. The credit card crisis nobody's talking about honestly. The recession risk that's closer than the headlines suggest. It all comes back to the same thing. The invisible systems. The hidden costs. The machinery that moves money out of your life before you ever get a say in where it goes. That's what we're here to understand. I'll see you in the next one.